Katerina Barlow thought she understood loneliness. She thought it was the dust that settled on everything in her one-room schoolhouse, a fine grit that got in her throat and in her soul. She thought it was the vast, swallowing silence of the Arizona desert at night, a quiet so loud it felt like a predator. She had fled a life in Boston, an arranged marriage to a man with hands like damp spiders, only to find herself in a different kind of cage. In Redemption Gulch, she was the spinster schoolmarm, respected but always an outsider, alone. She thought she understood the harsh realities of this land, the rattlesnakes, the flash floods, the desperation in the eyes of the homesteaders, but she knew nothing, not until the day the sun was blotted out by a figure in her doorway. He was a man larger than any she had ever seen, his skin the color of burnished copper, his eyes as dark and ancient as the mesas. He was Apache, and he hadn't come for blood or gold. He had come for her. The heat that Tuesday was a physical blow. Katerina had dismissed her students early, their energy sapped by the oppressive sun. She sat at her small desk, staring at a ledger that told a grim story, ink almost dry, salt pork gone, coffee beans being rationed. Her salary from the town was 3 months overdue. Sheriff Brodie just shrugged when she asked, "Times are tough, Miss Barlow." Tough didn't begin to cover it. The town's most powerful rancher, Clayton Reed, was making his intentions known. He was a man carved from the same hard rock as the mountains, with a possessive smile that made her skin crawl. He spoke of building her a house, of giving her his name, as if it were a gift. To the other women, it was a dream. To Katerina, it was a more spacious cage with a prettier view. His polite courtship was a tightening rope. That's when the shadow fell. It wasn't a cloud. It was sudden, absolute, and chilling. Katerina's hand went to the only weapon she had, a flimsy silver letter opener on her desk. The man in the doorway filled the entire frame. He was immense, not fat, but tall and broad, with corded muscles that spoke of a life of constant hardship and strength. A single eagle feather was tied in his long black hair. His face was all hard angles, a mask of weathered endurance. But it was his eyes that held her. They scanned the room, the children's clumsy drawings, her worn copies of Shakespeare, and then they landed on her, and they did not move. He was Apache, not one of the broken men from the reservations. He was from the high country, a ghost from the free tribes. Panic, cold and sharp, lanced through her. She'd heard the stories, the whispered fears of raids and scalpings. He took a step inside, silent on the floorboards. The room filled with the scent of pine, leather, and something wild, something elemental. He stopped a few feet from her desk, his presence sucking the very air from the room. Her voice, when she found it, was a thin, reedy thing. "What do you want?" He didn't smile. His expression was impossible to read. He looked at her with an intensity that stripped away the schoolmarm and left a small, frightened woman 1,000 miles from home. He spoke. His voice wasn't the guttural grunt the townsfolk mimicked. It was a deep, resonant baritone. His English was precise. "You are the teacher," he said. It was not a question. She could only nod, her throat tight. "They say you are alone," he continued. "You have no man, no family." "My affairs are my own," she managed, a spark of her old Boston defiance flickering. A flicker of something, amusement, maybe respect, crossed his face. "I have watched you." The admission sent a fresh wave of ice through her veins. "You walk alone. You buy food for one. You read your books by the lamp long after the town is dark. You are strong," he said, "but you are not safe here." "I am perfectly capable of taking care of myself," she lied, her hand trembling around the letter opener. He ignored her. His gaze became heavier, more direct, as if he were weighing her very soul. He took another step forward. She flinched back. He held up a hand, not in threat, but to pause. The silence stretched on, thick with unspoken meaning. Then he delivered the words that shattered her world. "My people are dying," he said, his voice low and raw with a pain that crossed the space between them. "The white man's sickness has taken many. The blue coats take the rest. We need new blood, strong blood." He paused, his dark eyes locking onto hers, seeing not just a woman, but a solution, a future. I need a wife, he declared. The words hung in the stifling air like a death sentence. And you, he continued, his gaze unwavering, you need strong sons to protect you in this land. It is a good trade. Katerina just stared. A wife, strong sons, a trade. The primal simplicity of it all stole her breath. This wasn't a proposal, it was a transaction, laid out on her dusty desk like a pelt to be bartered. Laughter, sharp and hysterical, bubbled up from her chest. It was the only sound she could make. A wife? She choked out. You walk into my school and declare you need a wife. Do you think I am livestock? A sack of flour to be claimed? The Apache's face didn't change. He just waited, his patience as vast as the desert outside. My name is Nash, he said finally, his voice calm. I am Nantan to the Chiricahua who follow me, a leader. I do not take what is not given. I am offering you a choice. A choice, she repeated, her voice rising. The choice between a life with a stranger, a savage, she spat the ugly word, or what? You'll drag me from here by my hair? For the first time, a flicker of emotion crossed his face. Not anger. It was a deep, weary sorrow. We are called savage because you do not understand us, he said softly, and I would not drag you. But you misunderstand your position, teacher. You think you are free. You are not. He gestured toward the town. That man with the silver star, Sheriff Brody, he offers you no help. The rancher, Clayton Reed, he looks at you with hunger. He thinks he will own you. The women smile, but they whisper behind their hands. You are a lone mare at the edge of a wolf pack, and you think your books will save you. Every word was an arrow, striking at the heart of her most private fears. He had seen it all. Her isolation, Reed's predatory advances, her dwindling supplies. He had watched her, and he had understood. The realization was terrifying. What do you want from me? She whispered, the fight draining out of her. I told you, Nash said, his voice urgent. My people are few. The spotted sickness took my wife and my first son. It has taken half our women and more of our children. The world is changing. Our sons must be able to walk in both worlds. They must have the strength of the Apache, but they must also understand the white man's ways, his words, his weapons. He looked at her, and for a moment, the giant warrior vanished. He was just a man, burdened by a terrible responsibility. You have this knowledge, he said, nodding toward her books. You have courage. Your children would be formidable. They would survive. The cold, pragmatic logic was chilling. He wasn't talking about love. He was talking about survival, about forging a new generation as a living weapon against extinction. And what of me? Katrina asked, her voice hollow. What life would I have? You would be the Nantan's wife, he said, as if that explained everything. Protected, honored. You would never be hungry. You would teach our children, not just your own, but all of them. You would make us stronger. She shook her head, trying to clear the fog. I can't. I know nothing of your ways. You learn, he said simply, as I learned your language, as I learned to read the marks in your books from a man I captured long ago. You are a teacher. It is your nature to learn. He saw the indecision warring in her eyes, the terror mixed with a flicker of something else. He pressed his advantage. Stay here, he said, his voice dropping lower. In a month, your money will be gone. You will choose. Marry the rancher who wishes to break you like a horse, or sell your body in the saloon, or you will starve. That is the freedom your people offer you. He was laying her future bare, and she couldn't deny the truth. Her pride, her education, they were luxuries she could no longer afford. She had fled one cage, only to find the walls of another closing in. Nash was offering a third option, a leap into an abyss, a terrifying unknown. But it was a choice. If I were to consider this, she began, the words tasting like ash, there would be conditions. Nash inclined his head. Speak them. I will not be a slave. I will be your wife and your only wife. I will be treated with respect. It is our way, he confirmed. The Nantan has one wife. My children will learn to read from my books, as well as learn your ways. That is why I have come for you." He nodded. She took a deep breath, steeling herself for the final, most important condition. "And you will never raise a hand to me in anger. Ever. I will not be beaten." The memory of her father's drunken rages, the real reason she kept men like Clayton Reed at arm's length, rose like bile in her throat. Nash's dark eyes studied her face. He seemed to see the old fear, the hidden wounds behind her demand. A look of understanding so profound it startled her passed over his features. He stepped forward. This time she did not flinch. He was close enough now that she could feel the heat radiating from his body. Slowly he reached out, not to grab her, but to gently take the silver letter opener from her trembling hand. He held it for a moment, then placed it carefully back on her desk. "An Apache warrior does not strike his woman," he said, his voice a low vow. "She is the heart of his home. To strike her is to strike himself. You have my word, Katarina Barlow. You will have my protection, my name, and my respect. But I will have your loyalty, and you will give me sons." He turned and walked to the doorway, his silhouette once again blocking the light. "You have until the full moon," he said, not looking back. "3 nights. Be ready. I will come for you then." And then he was gone. She was left alone in the ringing silence, dust motes dancing in the column of light where the giant had stood. She looked at her empty ledger, at the door to her lonely room, and at the vast, merciless desert beyond. For the first time, she wasn't just afraid of the wilderness. She was afraid of the agonizing choice it had just offered her. The next 3 days were a fever dream. Katrina barely slept, the face of the Apache leader haunting her thoughts. By day, she taught her students, her voice a distant echo in her own ears. Her mind was 1,000 miles away in the rugged mountains he called home. Every shadow that crossed the window made her heart leap into her throat. Clayton Reed stopped by, of course. He tipped his hat with that infuriatingly confident smile. "Evening, Miss Barlow," he'd said, his eyes roaming over her as if she were already his property. "Heard a rumor you had a visitor, an unwelcome one." News traveled fast in Redemption Gulch. "I'm quite all right, Mr. Reed," she replied, her voice cool. "Just remember, a lady like you needs protection out here." He pressed, his hand lingering on the doorframe. "My offer still stands." His words, meant to be a comfort, were the final push she needed. The choice was between a gilded cage and an unknown wilderness. She found herself packing. Not much. Her sturdiest clothes, her cherished copies of Shakespeare and Keats, and a small leather-bound journal. She was terrified, but beneath the terror was a sliver of something else, a wild, reckless sense of agency. For the first time, she wasn't just reacting to her fate, she was choosing it. On the night of the full moon, she sat in the darkened schoolhouse, a single bag at her feet, waiting. True to his word, he appeared, a solid presence materializing from the gloom. He had 2 wiry Mustangs. He said nothing, simply taking her bag and tying it expertly behind one of the saddles. He helped her mount, his large hands surprisingly gentle as they circled her waist to lift her. Their journey was silent and swift, under the cold silver light of the moon. He navigated the treacherous terrain with an instinct that felt supernatural. For him, this harsh landscape was not an enemy. It was home. When the sun rose, they arrived at his camp. It was not the savage village of her imagination. Tucked into a hidden canyon, watered by a thin, clear stream, were a dozen or so wickiups, domed huts made of branches and hides. Women looked up from their work, their expressions a mixture of curiosity and suspicion. Children stopped their play to stare at the white-faced woman Nash had brought into their midst. An old woman with a face like a wrinkled map approached them. Nash spoke to her in the flowing Apache tongue. The woman who Nash introduced as Sansere, his mother's sister, looked Katerina up and down, her gaze missing nothing. She grunted, then turned to Katerina and spoke in heavily accented English. "You are thin," she stated. "You must eat. Come." The first weeks were a trial by fire. The life was brutally hard. Katerina, who had thought her life in Redemption Gulch was one of hardship, quickly learned the meaning of true toil. She learned to grind mesquite beans into flour, to find water where there seemed to be none, to stitch buckskin with an awl and sinew. Her soft hands quickly became calloused and raw. Her presence was a source of tension. A young, brooding warrior named Doda, who she learned was Nash's cousin, made his contempt clear. He stared at her with open hostility, muttering to the other men. He saw her as a weakness, a symbol of the white world that had brought them nothing but misery. He believed Nash's choice was a betrayal. Nash himself was a constant, steady, but distant presence. Theirs was not a marriage of affection. They slept in the same wickiup, but on separate bedrolls of buffalo hide. He was her protector and her provider, not her companion. He was waiting for her to prove herself, not by declaration, but by deed. One evening, as Katerina struggled to scrape a deer hide, the knife slipping in her clumsy grip, Sonsir came and sat beside her. She took the tool from Katerina's hand and with a few deft strokes, showed her the proper angle. "You think with your head," the old woman said, her voice raspy. "You must feel the work with your hands. The hide tells you what it needs." Frustrated and exhausted, Katerina felt tears welling. "I am trying. It is just so different." Sincere looked at her, her black eyes softening for a moment. "The Nantan chose you for your mind," she said. "But you cannot live in this world with your mind alone. Your heart must learn the rhythm of the mountain. Your hands must learn the song of the work. Be patient. The desert does not hurry." Slowly, painfully, Katerina began to adapt. She started a small school for the children, scratching the English alphabet in the dirt with a stick. They were bright and eager, and in their faces she found a sense of purpose. They in turn taught her. They showed her which berries were sweet and which were poison, how to read animal tracks, how to sit in silence and just listen. Her relationship with Nash remained a careful dance of distance and respect. He would watch her with the children, a thoughtful, unreadable expression on his face. One night he found her reading Shakespeare by the firelight, her lips moving silently. He sat across from her. After a long silence, he spoke. "Read to me." Startled, she looked up. "What?" "The words in your book." "Read them aloud." Hesitantly, she began to read from The Tempest. Her voice gained strength as she lost herself in the rhythm of the verse, a world of magic and mystery so far removed from their own. Nash listened intently, his eyes closed. When she finished, he was silent for a long time. "Your world makes magic with words," he said finally, his voice soft. "My people find it in the wind and the stones." He opened his eyes and looked at her. Perhaps they are the same thing. It was the first crack in the wall between them. The first moment she felt they were not just two parties in a contract, but two people from different worlds trying to find a common language. She was still an outsider. But for the first time, huddled by a fire in a hidden Apache camp, Katerina Barlow felt a flicker of something she hadn't felt in a very long time. A fragile, tentative sense of belonging. The news of Katerina Barlow's disappearance hit Redemption Gulch like a dust storm. At first, it was simple concern. But when a stable boy mentioned seeing her ride out with the giant Apache, concern curdled into pure outrage. The story wrote itself. The gentle schoolmarm, a beacon of civilization, had been abducted by a savage brute. Clayton Reed was the one who fanned the flames. Her rejection had been a public humiliation. This was a personal affront. It was one thing to be turned down. It was another to be turned down for an Apache. In his mind, she had not made a choice. She had been stolen, and he would be her rescuer. "He's taken her!" Reed bellowed in the saloon, slamming his fist on the bar. "That red-skinned devil has taken Miss Barlow. Are we going to stand for it? Are we going to let our women be carried off like cattle?" His words found fertile ground. Men who had barely given Katerina a second glance were suddenly her sworn protectors. The Apache were a convenient scapegoat for every hardship they faced. This was a chance to turn their simmering resentment into righteous action. Sheriff Brody, a man more concerned with a quiet life than true justice, found himself backed into a corner. He knew venturing into the mountains after a Chiricahua war leader was suicide, but the pressure, fueled by Reed's money, was immense. "Now hold on, Clayton," Brody said, trying to be cautious. "We don't know for a fact she was taken against her will." "Against her will?" Reed scoffed. "She's a lady, Brody, a refined woman from back east. You think she chose to go live in a mud hut and eat snake? He's got her tied up somewhere, scared out of her mind. It's our duty as white men to get her back. The rhetoric worked. A posse was formed within the hour. Angry ranchers, bored farmhands, and drunken opportunists, all armed to the teeth and full of whiskey-fueled bravado. Clayton Reed, astride his magnificent black stallion, looked every bit the conquering hero. Their first stop was the deserted schoolhouse. Reed kicked open the door. The room was tidy, orderly, no signs of a struggle. He must have surprised her, one of the men muttered. Reed strode to her desk. He rifled through her papers, his crude hands smudging her neat lesson plans. He was looking for evidence, for confirmation of his story. Then he found it, her journal, tucked beneath a stack of books. He flipped it open, his lips moving as he read her elegant script. His face darkened. The last entries weren't about fear. They were about her dwindling finances, her frustration with the town, and a single chilling line written on the night of the full moon. I have made my choice. Reed slammed the journal shut. This didn't fit. A woman choosing an Apache over him? It was unthinkable. It meant she wasn't a victim. She was a traitor. The thought twisted his fury into something colder, more venomous. She writes that she was afraid, Reed lied, his voice ringing with false piety. Afraid for her life. The savage forced her. He held up the journal as if it were a holy relic. We ride at dawn. We'll bring Miss Barlow back, and we'll string up the monster that took her. Sheriff Brody watched him, a knot of unease tightening in his stomach. He knew Reed was lying. He could see it in the man's eyes. But the momentum was now unstoppable. The fury of Redemption Gulch had been unleashed, and it was thundering toward Nash's hidden camp. A wave of self-righteous violence, disguised as a rescue. Brody knew this wouldn't end with a simple homecoming. It would end in blood. Meanwhile, in the canyon, a scout rode into camp, his horse lathered in sweat. He went straight to Nash, speaking in low, urgent tones. Nash listened, his face impassive, but a new hardness settled in his eyes. He found Katerina by the stream. The town is coming, he said, his voice flat. Katerina looked up, her heart lurching. Coming? Why? They believe you are a prisoner, Nash explained. The rancher, Reed, leads them. They come with many rifles. Sincere spat on the ground. They come to kill. Fear, cold and familiar, gripped Katerina. The world she had left behind was now coming to destroy the one she had just begun to build. What will you do? She asked Nash, her voice trembling. We will not run, he said, his hand resting on the hilt of the knife at his belt. This is our land. We will fight. Dota and the other warriors were already gathering, checking their weapons. There was no panic, only a deadly resolve. Dota shot Katerina a look of pure loathing. This is your fault, his eyes screamed. You have brought death to us. Katerina felt a crushing weight of responsibility. It didn't matter if she was a victim or a willing participant. Her presence here was the pretext they needed. She looked at Nash, the leader preparing to defend his people from a threat she had inadvertently brought upon them. The unsettling alliance they had forged was about to be tested by fire and gunpowder. The posse from Redemption Gulch moved with the clumsy arrogance of men who believed in their cause and their weapons. They made enough noise to alert anyone within 5 miles. Clayton Reed rode at their head, his face a mask of grim determination. Sheriff Brody trailed behind, his dread growing with every step. Nash did not meet them on open ground. He was a master of this terrain. He led his handful of warriors into the narrow, rock-strewn approach to the canyon, setting an ambush that was both elegant and deadly. They were ghosts among the boulders, invisible, silent. The posse rode directly into the trap. The first sign of trouble was an arrow appearing from nowhere, thudding into the pommel of Reed's saddle. His horse reared, screaming. Before the men could raise their rifles, gunfire erupted from the rocks above. It wasn't a wild spray of bullets. It was precise, targeted shots. One man clutched his shoulder. Another's hat was shot clean off his head. Panic exploded. They're up there, someone yelled. In the rocks! Men scrambled for cover, firing blindly into the canyon walls. Nash's voice boomed from the heights, amplified by the canyon's acoustics. Turn back, white men. The woman is not your concern. The hell she isn't, Reed roared back, his face purple with rage. Give us Miss Barlow, you heathen, or we'll burn you out. From his perch, Nash watched the chaos. He could have ended it then. His warriors could have picked off the posse one by one. But a massacre would only bring the cavalry, a war he could not win. He was fighting for survival, not vengeance. He gave a sharp command in Apache. The gunfire ceased. The sudden silence was more unnerving than the battle. Send your sheriff forward, Nash called out. Alone, or the next shots will find flesh. There was a frantic, muttered conversation below. Sheriff Brodie, looking pale but resolute, holstered his pistol and urged his horse forward into the open. Nash! Brodie yelled, his voice strained. We just want the teacher. Let her go, and we'll leave in peace. This was the moment, the pivot upon which everything would turn. Back in the camp, Katerina had listened to the distant sounds of battle with a heart full of terror. Sancerre and the other women had gathered the children, their faces stoic but their eyes wide with fear. Doda was out there fighting, and Katerina knew he would blame her for any blood that was shed. She couldn't stay hidden. This was her battle too. Ignoring Sancerre's sharp command to stay put, Katerina scrambled up a narrow path to a ledge overlooking the canyon entrance. She arrived breathless, just as Nash was about to answer the sheriff. He turned, his eyes widening in surprise and anger as he saw her. Go back, he ordered, his voice a low growl. No, she said, her voice shaking but firm. This is about me. Let me speak. He studied her for a long moment, seeing not a frightened woman, but a determined one. He gave a curt nod. Katerina stepped to the edge of the ledge, her simple buckskin dress a stark contrast to the lace and corsets of her past. Down below, the men of the posse looked up. A collective gasp went through them. They saw her, alive and unharmed, standing beside the giant Apache. Miss Barlow! Sheriff Brodie called out, relief washing over his face. Are you all right? He hasn't hurt you? Clayton Reed pushed his horse forward, his face a storm of conflicting emotions. Katerina, thank God, we've come to save you. Katerina took a deep breath. This was it, the choice. She could run to them, back to the cage she knew, or she could stand her ground here, on this rock, and claim the terrifying, uncertain freedom she had chosen. I am not a prisoner, Sheriff Brodie, she called down, her voice clear and strong, echoing in the canyon. I am here by my own choice. The words fell like stones into the silence. The posse stared, slack-jawed. Clayton Reed's face twisted from concern to disbelief, then to pure, unadulterated fury. Choice? He bellowed, his voice cracking. They've twisted your mind, Katerina. That's not you talking. That's fear. I have never been less afraid in my life, Clayton, she replied, her gaze locking with his. The lie was so profound, so complete, that it became its own kind of truth. Nash has treated me with honor and respect, more than I can say for some men in Redemption Gulch. The barb hit its mark. Reed flinched as if struck. She's a traitor, one of Reed's men yelled. A race traitor. The sentiment rippled through the posse. Their righteous rescue mission had just been exposed as an unwanted intrusion. Their damsel was not in distress. Sheriff Brodie held up a hand. He looked from Katerina, standing proud on the ledge, to Reed, his face contorted with hate. The sheriff was not a brave man, but he was not a fool. He could see the truth. The lady has made her choice, Brodie announced, his voice carrying the weight of defeat. There's nothing for us here. We're leaving. Like hell we are, Reed snarled, drawing his pistol. She belongs with her own kind. He aimed the pistol, not at Nash, at Katerina. It was an act of pure spite. If he couldn't have her, no one would. Before he could fire, an arrow flew from the rocks with breathtaking speed. It struck Reed in the forearm, causing him to scream in pain and drop the gun. A crippling shot, not a killing one. A message. Nash stepped forward beside Katerina, his rifle held loosely in one hand. He was an image of absolute power and restraint. The next arrow will be in your throat, Nash said, his voice deadly calm. Leave. Now. Sheriff Brodie didn't need to be told twice. He and the more sensible men began to back away. Reed, clutching his arm and spewing curses, was forced to follow, his eyes still fixed on Katerina, with a look of murderous hatred. As the posse retreated in disarray, Katerina stood on the ledge, the adrenaline slowly seeping from her body, leaving her trembling. She had done it. She had publicly severed her ties to her old world. She had chosen a side. She turned to Nash. He was looking at her, his dark eyes no longer unreadable. In their depths, she saw something new. It was not just respect for her courage. It was a dawning wonder, an admiration that went beyond the terms of their original bargain. In the dust and the blood, in the echo of gunfire, their contract had been irrevocably broken. And in its place, something far more complicated and far more dangerous had just begun to grow. The aftermath of the standoff settled over the camp like a quiet snowfall. The immediate threat was gone, but the air was thick with unspoken changes. Katerina's public declaration had altered everything. She was no longer just the white woman Nash had brought home. She was the woman who had stood with them. For some like Sonsere, it earned a new level of deep, quiet respect. For others like Doda, it only deepened their suspicion. A dog that turns on its first master, his glare seemed to say, cannot be trusted with a new one. But the most profound shift was between Katerina and Nash. The rigid, formal distance they had maintained began to dissolve. They were no longer just partners in a contract of survival. They were allies who had faced death together. One evening, a few days later, Nash returned from a hunt with a deep gash on his leg from a cornered javelina. He limped into the wickiup and sat heavily, preparing to tend to the wound himself with a heated knife. Katerina wordlessly took the supplies from him. She knelt before him, cleaning the wound with a gentleness his warrior's life had rarely afforded him. He watched her, his body tense at first, then slowly relaxing under her careful touch. "In my world," she said softly, not looking up from her work, "a man would be howling for a doctor." A low rumble, like stones shifting deep underground, came from his chest. It was a moment before she realized he was chuckling. The sound was so unexpected it made her pause. "An Apache warrior does not cry out," he said, his voice laced with faint amusement. "It invites the spirits of the wound to linger." "A fascinating theory," she murmured, concentrating on stitching the gash. "I prefer the theory that it simply alerts predators to your weakness." He was silent for a moment. "That too," he admitted. When she was finished, her work neat and clean, she looked up. Their faces were only inches apart. The air in the small wickiup grew thick, charged with a sudden energy. She saw the lines of pain around his eyes, but she also saw the man behind the leader, the man who carried the weight of his people's future on his shoulders. He saw not just the teacher, but the fierce person who had stood on that ledge. He reached out his hand, gently touching her cheek. His thumb traced the line of her jaw. It was not a gesture of ownership, but of discovery, of tenderness. It was more intimate than any kiss. "You have the heart of a warrior, Katerina Barlow," he whispered. The use of her full name, the softness in his voice undid her. A single tear traced a path through the grime on her cheek. He caught it with his thumb. "Why did you stay?" he asked, his voice low and serious. "On the ledge. You could have gone with them." "I told you," she whispered back. "I made a choice." "Why?" he pressed. "It was not the life you were born to." She looked toward the flickering fire. "The life I was born to was a cage, a comfortable one perhaps, but still a cage. I think I would rather be free and terrified than safe and suffocated." She met his gaze again. "And my place is here now, with the children, with you." The admission hung in the air between them. That night, when they lay on their separate bedrolls, the space between them felt less like a chasm and more like a breath held in anticipation. This burgeoning closeness did not go unnoticed. Doda watched them with growing fury. He saw Nash's softening gaze, Katerina's new confidence. He saw it all as a poison seeping into the heart of their people. She was making their leader weak, filling his head with white ideas. He decided to force the issue. A few days later, while Nash was away tracking a mountain lion, Doda confronted Katerina. He strode up to where she was teaching a group of children, his face a thundercloud. "This is not your place," he snarled in English. He grabbed one of her books and threw it into the fire. The children scattered, terrified. Katerina stood her ground. "They deserve to learn." "They deserve to learn our way," Don he spat. "How to hunt, how to fight, How to survive. Not this chicken scratch from your dying world. He took a menacing step toward her. Nantan is blind. He sees a future in you, but I see an end. You are a disease, a white sickness, just like the one that took his first wife. The cruelty of the remark was a physical blow, but before Katerina could respond, Sincere was there, stepping between them. The old woman was half Dota's size, but she faced him with the fury of a cornered badger, unleashing a torrent of Apache. The other women of the camp began to gather, their expressions hard, their loyalty clear. Dota, outmaneuvered and shamed, finally backed down, spitting on the ground near Katerina's feet before storming away. Sincere turned to Katerina, her face grim. He will not challenge Nantan with fists, she said. His poison is in his words. He will try to turn the other warriors against him. He believes Nash's heart has made him weak. He will try to prove it. When Nash returned, he saw the burned book and the tension in the camp. Katerina told him everything. The rage that entered his eyes was terrifying. It was cold and absolute. He found Dota. The confrontation was immediate. It was not a fight, but a judgment. Dota was not exiled. Their numbers were too few to lose a warrior. But he was stripped of certain honors, publicly rebuked by his leader. The humiliation solidified Dota's hatred into a deadly patient thing. He would wait for his moment. Later that night, the air in the wiki-up was heavy. Nash came and sat beside Katrina's bedroll. He will not harm you again, Nash said, the vow absolute. You are Shika's, my wife. He stumbled over the word as if testing its new meaning. He did not move back to his own bedroll. Instead, he lay down beside her, his large frame a warm, solid presence in the darkness. He did not touch her, but his proximity was a statement. The wall between them was finally gone. In the quiet darkness of the canyon, surrounded by whispers of love and simmering hate, Katerina Barlow knew her life was now inextricably bound to the giant Apache. Their bargain of convenience had blossomed into a fragile, dangerous affair of the heart, and the price of that love was yet to be paid. The peace in the canyon was a fragile skin stretched over simmering hatred. In Redemption Gulch, Clayton Reed's wounded pride festered into a dark obsession. He would not be denied his vengeance, and his poison soon found a willing vessel, a secret meeting in the dead of night, a treacherous pact. Dota, his heart a cold stone of ambition and resentment, forged an alliance with the man who had tried to kill his people. Their plan was not a warrior's fight, but a coward's strike. On a moonless night, Dota would guide Reed and a few hired guns to the camp's spring, its very lifeblood, and poison it. It was a plan to kill everyone. The warriors, the women, the children. An act of total annihilation. The attack came when the sky was a black, starless void. The only warning was the strangled bark of a camp dog, cut brutally short. Nash was awake in an instant. He slipped out of their wiki-up, a silent shadow. A moment later, a single muffled shot echoed from the direction of the spring. Nash was back in a breath, his face a grim mask. Reed, he said, the name a curse. Dota has betrayed us. They are at the spring. The warriors armed themselves in deadly silence. But Katerina knew this was not a fight that could be won by arrows and rifles alone. An attack on the water was an attack on the future. While Nash moved to intercept the men at the spring, her mind, the asset he had first sought, raced. Reed's hatred was personal. He would come for her. He would want to see her face when her new world died. She spotted the old dry wiki-ups used for storage on the far side of the camp. An idea, desperate and brilliant, took hold. She seized a torch. She ran to Sincere. A diversion! She cried, her voice ringing with an authority she didn't know she possessed. Burn the old huts. Make them think we're escaping up the far canyon wall. The old woman understood immediately and began rallying the others. But Katerina's gamble was not yet complete. She would not be a refugee. She would be the bait. With another torch, she scrambled up a high, narrow ledge overlooking the path to the spring. A dead end. There she lit a small, visible fire, a beacon for a hateful man. The ruse worked perfectly. Seeing flames erupt across the camp, Reed believed the Apache were in a panicked flight. Leaving 2 men to finish poisoning the water, he turned with a triumphant sneer. She's mine, he snarled, spotting Katerina's lone fire. He and his last gunman scrambled up the rocks toward her. He found her trapped, her face illuminated by the torchlight. "It's over, Katerina," he sneered, raising his pistol. "You chose the wrong side." "No!" a voice growled from the darkness behind him. "She did not." Reed spun, his face a mask of terror, as Nash emerged from the shadows. The confrontation was not a gunfight. It was a primal collision. Reed, fueled by spite, was no match for a man fighting for his world. The struggle was short, ending with the flash of Nash's knife. As Reed fell, his gunman swung his rifle toward Nash. But before he could fire, an arrow appeared in his chest, sprouting from the darkness below. Katerina looked down from the ledge and saw Doda, his bow still raised. He had led the enemy in, but in the final moment, he could not watch them slaughter his kin. He had chosen family over vengeance. He looked up at Katerina, his face a torment of shame and grim resolution. He gave her a single, sharp nod, an admission, an apology, a farewell, before melting back into the night, an exile by his own hand. The rising sun illuminated a quiet, final victory. The water was safe. The threat was gone. Katerina stood with Nash on the ledge. The canyon that was now their home spread below. He came to her, his hands gently framing her face. All pretense, all bargains were gone, burned away by the night's violence. "You saved us," he said, his voice thick with an emotion she had never heard from him before. "Your mind, your warrior's heart. You are the heart of this people, Katerina." He leaned down and kissed her, a kiss that sealed not a contract, but a bond forged in blood and fire. It was a promise of a new future, a life woven from two starkly different worlds. Months later, holding their newborn son, a child with his father's dark, watchful eyes and her own fierce spirit, Katerina knew their trade had been more than good. She had come to the desert a lonely teacher, running from a cage, only to find her true, untamable freedom in the arms of an Apache chief and in the cry of their strong son. The first of a new people, the story of Katerina Barlow and the Apache leader Nash is more than just a tale of the Old West. It's a testament to the raw, untamable power of the human spirit to adapt, to survive, and to find love in the most unexpected corners of the world. It reminds us that courage isn't about the absence of fear, but about acting in spite of it. Theirs was a union born not of convenience, but of a shared will to forge a future against impossible odds, proving that sometimes the most enduring bonds are the ones that challenge every convention we know. What lines are you willing to cross for survival, for love? If this story of grit, passion, and the clash of cultures resonated with you, please take a moment to hit that like button to let us know. Share it with someone who appreciates a story that goes beyond the simple tales of cowboys and Indians. And most importantly, subscribe to our channel and ring that notification bell. We have so many more lost tales and hidden histories from the forgotten West to share with you.